Okay, so first of all, in order to calculate a correlation, you need to use the correlation formula. Then select the first array and then select the second array. In this case, I'm going to select the same range twice and close brackets and enter. Then when I drag this along once, both ranges go one column to the side, but I don't want that, so I'm going to press F4 to insert the $signs around the first array to make it an absolute reference. Then I can drag it across and the first array will stay in the same column and the second array will get dragged across. So this correlation is now for CFC 11 versus HCFC 141b, which is what I want. You can see it lines up with that in the table. Now if I drag this down once, you can see that the range gets dragged down by one row, but I don't want that, so I'm going to press F4 twice to put the $sign just in front of the row number. That won't affect it when I drag it sideways, but I can now drag it down and it will stay in the same rows. But this time I want the range for the first array to go to the side by one column because I want it to be CFC 113 this time versus everything else. And then I can drag these sideways. So this is the first method, dragging down the formula, then manually changing the column letters, and then dragging the formula across. So this is now CFC 113 versus Halon 1211, which is what I want in this part of the table. And you can tell the formula is working correctly because you'll end up with a diagonal line of ones going down the middle. Every time you correlate one variable with itself, you'll end up with a correlation of 1, and the bottom triangle of the table should be a mirror image of the top triangle. So CFC 11 here versus CFC 113 gets you this number, which is also what you get if you do CFC 113 here versus CFC 11. It's the same number. Now the next method is to use the transpose formula. So I'm going to select the whole of my table, press Ctrl C to copy, then go down here and right click and paste transposed. If you want to make this a dynamic range, we can delete this and then do equals transposed. Then select the whole of the range and do Control Shift and Enter. And now we have the table flipped around on its side, and this table here is linked to the first table using a formula. So if I change something in this table, for example, if I type 1000 in here, it will update itself and I'll end up with 1000 here. Now I can use the correlation formula again and select this range here. Then for the second array, I can choose the whole of the top row of this table and close brackets and enter. Then if I drag this to the side, this range here gets shifted one column to the side, which is what I want, but then this range here also gets shifted one column to the side, and I don't want this. So I'm going to edit the formula. So this range here has $signs in front of the column letters, so they won't change when I drag the formula across. Now I can drag this across and it has stayed in the same place here. Now if I drag this formula down, this range here has gone down by 1 row, which is what I want, but this range here has also gone down by 1 row, and I don't want that one to move. So for the first range, I'm going to press F4 twice until I have the dollar signs just in front of the row numbers. So then they'll stay in the same place. Now I should be able to drag the formula across and then down, and now the formula is working correctly. So in this case we have Halon 1211 versus CFC 113, which is what we want in the table. So the tables are the opposite way round, and then each range has dollar signs in different places. One of them has dollar signs in front of the column letter, and the other has dollar signs in front of the row number. And in this way we can drag the formula to fill the whole of the table. For the next method, you can use the offset formula. So to demonstrate how this works, for offset you need to select a range. This is going to be the whole of the table. Then for the time being I'm going to put rows as 1, columns as 1, height as 1 and width as 1, and close brackets and enter. Now we get a number in this range. What this is doing, the offset formula will take a range, will look in the top most left-handed cell, and then will offset from that. So in this case it's offsetting by 1 row, so we can think of this as row 0, and then you offset by 1 row, and we're also offsetting by 1 column, so we go 1 column to the side, and then we have a height of 1 and a width of 1. That means it's only going to return me 1 cell, which is this cell here. So we end up with the number 240.2, which is what we get here. It's a different number of decimal places, but it's the same number. Now if I change this to 2 rows, we are now going to offset by 2 rows, so that's 1, 2, then still offset by 1 column, and we end up with this cell here, 242.4, which is what we get here. Now if I change this to 2 columns, we're now offsetting by 2 rows, 1, 2, then 2 columns, 1, 2, so I end up with this number here, 74.4, which is what I have down here. Then if I change the height to 2, it's now giving me 2 numbers. Now this will only work if you have spilled arrays in your version of Excel, but as this is only for demonstration purposes, it doesn't really matter. But in this case we're going 2 rows down, 2 columns to the side, and then I have a height of 2, which means it's going to show me 2 cells as my result, so this cell here and the one underneath it, which is what we end up with here. Then if I change the width to 2 as well, what we have now is 4 numbers. So this is 2 rows down, then 2 rows, 2 columns to the side, and then I have a height of 2, so 1, 2, and also a width of 2, so 1, 2. So I end up with these 4 numbers here. Now we know how the offset formula works. We can put this inside a correlation formula, but before that we need to have some numbers to tell it how many columns to offset by. So type 1 and then click and drag while holding down Control to fill in the rest of the numbers. And I'm going to do the same thing down the side as well. Now for the correlation formula, type offset. The reference is going to be the whole of this range here. Then for rows, I want rows 1. So I'm going to offset by 1 row, and I want to start in the first row that has numbers. Then for columns, that's going to be this cell here, and I'm going to press F4 to put the dollar signs in front of the row number, so that when I drag the formula down, it will continue to look in this row, but when I drag the formula across, it will look in different columns. Then for the height, this is going to be the number of data points that I have. So my table starts in row 2 and ends in row 20. So that means I have 19 data points. Then for the width, I only want 1 column's worth of results. So I'm going to put 1 in here and close brackets. Then I'm going to copy all of this offset formula using Control C to copy and Control V to paste, but for the second range I want to link it up to this number here, and this time I'm going to press F4 3 times until I have the dollar sign in front of the column letter instead, and then close brackets and enter. Now I can drag the formula across and then down, except I need this range here to also have dollar signs around it, so the actual reference range stays in place. And this time it should work. And I end up with the same table here as I have here. So if we check this formula is working, the offset will always be by 1 row, because we always want to start in this row here, and it's also always going to have a height of 19 because we always want to include all 19 of these numbers, and it's always going to have a width of 1 because we're always going to want 1 column's worth of data. What changes is the number of columns we offset by. So in this case we have offset by 3 columns, so that's 1, 2, 3, so we get Halon 1211, which matches up with what we want in the table. Then for the second range we've offset by 2, so that's 1, 2 columns, so we end up with CFC 113, which matches up with this in the table, so we know the formula is working correctly. Now I am going to hide this. And the next method involves using a combination of the address and the indirect formula. So the address formula, if I type 1 in the row number and 1 in the column number, this gives me a cell reference for A1. And if I type 2 in the row number, this changes to A2. And if I type 2 in the column number, this changes to B2 because B is the second column. Then with the indirect formula, I can link to this cell and it will give me a number. And what this formula is doing is that it's looking in this cell and seeing B2, then it's going to B2 over here, and it's finding 240.2, which is the number that it gives me as a result. So I can use the indirect formula to indirectly reference to another cell. Now I want to use this to create the range that I want to feed into the correlation formula. Now I'm going to want to start in the B column and go to the E column. So that's going to mean starting in column 2. Then I'll hold down Control and drag it until I get to 5. Then with the address formula, I need 2 addresses for the start and the end of the range. The row number is going to start in row 2. Then the column number is going to be this number here, and close brackets and enter. Then I can drag this down. Then for the end of the range, the row number needs to be row 20, and the column number needs to be this here again, and close brackets and enter. And then I will drag this down, and now I have the beginning and the end of my range. I can use the indirect formula inside the correlation formula. So I want this cell here, and I need to press F4 to put the dollar signs in front of the column letter, so that when I drag the formula across, it will continue to look in this cell, but when I drag the formula down, it will look in different rows. Then I need the colon, because a range has a colon in the middle of it in Excel. So this is going to be the and symbol, then a quotation mark, then the colon, then another quotation mark, then another and symbol. Then I need the cell I want the range to end at. And for this one, I also need the dollar sign in front of the column letter, then close brackets and comma. And for the second range, I can just select this normally. So I can select this range here, but I am going to have to use F4 to put the dollar signs in front of the row number, so that it will stay in the same place when I drag the formula down. And then close brackets, and then I can drag this formula across and down to fill in the rest of the table. So what this formula is doing is that it is finding me D2 to D20, which is this column here with the Halon 1211 data in it, which is the data that I want in this table. It's lining up correctly. And if I select this here and then press F9, you can see it changes to that range. I'll just Control Z to get out of that. And then that is then used by the correlation formula to calculate the correlation. The next method involves using the Toolpak add-in. So go to File and Options, and then Add-ins, and Manage Excel Add-ins Go. Then there should be something called Analysis Toolpak here at the top. Make sure that is ticked and then select OK. You'll probably need to save your Excel spreadsheet and then close it and then reopen it in order to get that to kick in. But once it's worked, you should be able to go to the Data tab and have something here called Data Analysis, which I'm now going to click on. Then from this list of data analysis tools, select correlation and OK. Then for the input range, select the whole of the table, not including the first column, but including all of the headers. Then it says grouped by columns, and that's correct because all of my variables are in their own columns. And then I also need to tick labels in first row because they are. For the output options, it defaults to a new worksheet, but I want to select an output range, and I'm just going to select just one cell here, and that's where the table will start, and OK. And now you can see here it has created the correlation table for me. It only gives me the bottom triangle of this table, but that doesn't really matter because in a correlation table like this, the bottom triangle is a mirror image of the top triangle, and it's all the same numbers, so you don't really need the top triangle here. Then for the next method, we're going to use another add-in called Real Stats. Now, the Real Statistics website has detailed instructions on how to download this add-in, and it is free to download, so I will just leave a link to that website in the description. But once you've downloaded it, you should get a new formula called equals core, C-O-R-R, and this will allow me to select the whole of the table and then close brackets and enter, and it will calculate the correlation matrix for me. Now I have dynamic spilled arrays, which means that the formula will spill to fill the number of cells it needs. If you don't have this, you'll need to select the correct number of cells beforehand, then type equals core, then select the data you want, then close brackets and Control Shift and Enter. And that will calculate the same table for you, and you'll end up with curly brackets either side of the formula. Now, this correlation formula is actually using another Excel formula in order to get this to work, so I will also show you that formula as well. If I add in some extra space down here, I'm then going to calculate the average and the standard deviation, so equals average, and then select this range here and close brackets and enter and drag it across, and then equals standard deviation, and select this range here and close brackets and enter, and then drag this across. Then I'm going to scroll down here and use the MMULT formula. So this is matrix multiplication, and the first array is going to be transposed, and the array is going to be the whole of my table minus all of their averages, then close brackets, and I actually need another closed brackets here, and then divide by the standard deviations, then close brackets again and comma. Then I'm going to copy this range here and paste it again, and that's going to become the second array in the MMULT formula. Now, all of this then needs to be divided by the number of data points I have minus 1. So my table goes from row 2 to row 20, so that means I have 19 data points, and I need to subtract 1 from that, so that's 18 data points, and enter. And you can see we end up with the same table here as we have over here and in all of the other tables as well. Now, I'm not going to explain how this works because I think it is unnecessarily complicated, and this is already quite a long video anyway, but I will leave a link in the description explaining how this works if you want to know. Okay, so in this video I have shown you different methods for calculating a correlation table in Excel, and that is everything.